Good morning. Roger Young was born in Tiffin, Ohio in 1918. He was diminutive of stature, not ever getting past 5'6". But he was one of those scrappy young men that went out for the football team and didn't have the height, didn't have the size, but he had the guts and the sheer will. And he won the coach over, and the coach allowed him to play. Played high school basketball, in which he was equally scrappy, and got into an accident where he was knocked down, hit his head on the floor, and it caused his hearing not only to be impaired, but to continue to decrease. And the same thing was happening to his sight. The longer he lived, his hearing got worse and his sight got worse. Because of that, when World War II came around, he was not able to go into the Army as he had hoped, but he did join the Ohio National Guard because their requirements were much less than the regular Army. He became a corporal in the National Guard and gained the respect of all his men. He was one of those guys that everybody liked. Just a great, great person. As the war wore on and there were need for more soldiers, the National Guard squad that he was a part of was made active. And he ended up on the Solomon Islands on a place called New Georgia. And he was sent out with a patrol of about 25 men to basically reconnoiter, do reconnaissance to find out the strength of the enemy, etc. And the island was held pretty much by the Japanese. They went and did their job, and they were coming back. And they ended up being ambushed by about 6 Japanese men who were in what was called a pillbox, or a machine gun nest up on the side of a hill. And they were caught. They couldn't retreat, couldn't go forward. And in the initial burst, 2 of his buddies were killed, and Roger Young was wounded. They all took cover and trying to figure out what to do. And the leader of the squad, now understand, when they had become part of the regular Army, Roger Young asked to be demoted, and his CO thought that he was being a coward, and what it was, he was afraid of endangering his men because of the problem with his hearing and with his eyesight. Just the kind of guy he was. They sent 2 men to try to flank the enemy, and they were both killed. Despairing what to do, the CO yelled out, "Regroup, retreat." Now that would expose them, but it obviously wouldn't expose them as much as moving forward toward the enemy. His CO said he doesn't know if Roger Young didn't hear him or he disobeyed him. But he started crawling. He said, "I see them. I know where they are." And he started crawling forward. Naturally, they opened fire on him. He was already wounded, and as he was crawling forward, he was riddled from his right leg all the way through his left arm as he was crawling with machine gun bullets. Made it to the base of the hill, leaned back against it, took a grenade out, pulled the pin, let the safety pin go, counted in his head, threw it straight up. And that hand grenade killed not only the enemy, but Roger Young. There are several military bases that have either parade grounds or test grounds that are named after Roger Young. He was given the Medal of Honor, among other medals, highest honor that he could receive, that could be given. And it's easy for us to say Roger Young was a hero, and he was. But there's a problem with that word, hero. Because one of the things it suggests is there's somebody that has a little extra that other people don't have. Because after all, none of the others did what he did. None of the others went to engage the enemy. What is it about someone like that who takes the responsibility of the whole squad upon himself, puts himself in danger, yes, even to the point of death, yet to save those? One of the reasons that we honor heroes is because that's something extra that they have. It was Roger Young's finest hour. But understand, the finest hour is when it's the darkest. The finest hour is when your army is surrounded and outnumbered and you're ambushed. The finest hour comes in the time of greatest adversity. The finest hour is when you look at peril not as the probability of defeat, but as the opportunity to demonstrate true grit. Winston Churchill, during that war, gave several speeches, as you know, many that are still, we use phrases from him even today. Churchill was an amazing leadership in that he presented to folks, and even Parliament. We would expect Parliament to be leaders that don't need to be inspired, yet that's the nature of human beings. And he gave 3 speeches to Parliament, 2 as the war in Europe was going. He gave one about the war in France. The first speech he gave was during the period of the Battle of France, and it's called his Blood, Toil, Tears, and Sweat speech. The next was given as that battle, and understand, France was the last foothold of Europe before Britain, and he understood that. This war is going to come to us. On May 13th, he gave his We Shall Fight on the Beaches speech. Finally, when France failed, he stood before Parliament, knowing Britain was next, just days before the Nazi bombing of Britain started. He stood before Parliament. Let me share with you the end of what he said. He's describing the war coming not only to Britain, but if they fall, to the United States and the rest of the world. And he described the Nazi regime as being incredibly powerful, using science for evil. Listen to his words. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will say this was their finest hour. Brothers and sisters, I think brave is a spurious concept for the reason that I mentioned. It suggests that there are just a few who have something that no one else has. I want to suggest to you that very often what we call bravery is really more about being a sociopath. It's not having the capacity to fear. I knew motorcycle racers who would racing motorcycles. I'm going to tell you something. If you race motorcycles and you have an ounce of fear, you will lose. If you race motorcycles and you have an ounce of smarts, you will lose. I've seen guys that would race, they would break an arm or a leg. They would go home, soak off the cast, and 2 weeks later they're racing again. They were reckless. They were self-destructive. And many call that bravery. Hebrews 11, that describes people that we would call brave. It doesn't use that word. Scripture doesn't use the word brave. What it uses is the word faith. And in Hebrews 11, the so-called Hall of Faith describes men and women of history who did things that others might call bravery. But over 20 times in that passage, their amazing feats are started with by faith. By faith. We live in a culture of cowards. Show me men and women who will take a stand on a principle and not back off when they get beat up on social media. Show me that. By the way, if you're going to say something and you're going to back it off, don't say it. If you're going to say it, mean it. If you get attacked, stand firm. Our culture calls that doubling down. I call it standing firm on what's real. Show me a congressman or a congresswoman, most of who claim to be God-fearing, that's what they ran on, who will take a biblical stand on a moral principle without compromise. We don't need heroes. We need men and women of faith. What we get are supposed heroes. Matthew chapter 10, verse 24, Jesus said, "A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. It is enough for the disciple that he become as the teacher, and the slave as his master. If they have called the head of the house Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? Therefore," hear these words, "therefore, fear them not. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in darkness, speak in the light. And what you hear whispered in your ear, proclaim upon the housetops." Again, "and do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul. But rather, fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent? And yet not one of them fall to the ground apart from your Father. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Therefore do not fear. You're more valuable than many sparrows. Everyone therefore who shall confess me before men, I will confess him before my Father who is in heaven." We need folks of faith who are confessors today in the United States of America right now. In the time of possibly, and I don't know how to measure these things, but in the time of maybe our greatest turmoil, certainly the greatest turmoil of the type that we have, we need folks who take a stand and stand on the right principles and don't move. Folks of faith. I look around me. What do I see? Fear everywhere. Do you see it? What are we, children? Where are the stand in the gap leaders? And I'm not talking about leaders who deny the reality that we have, but leaders who say this is the reality, but this is how we're going to overcome it. How did they overcome? In Hebrews 11, by faith. They overcame things that you and I will never, most probably ever have to face. They overcame things that were so much bigger than what they are. Were they heroes? No. Were they brave? No. They believed God. He delivered them. He worked through them. We have a fear of our president. We have a fear of our election. We have a fear of the other party. We have fear of economic collapse. We have a fear of starting school. We have a fear of anarchy and riots in the streets, of the demise of police departments. We have a fear that a disease with a 90% survival rate is going to kill us all. We have a fear that we are never going to be the same as we were after the pandemic. Our news broadcasts every day are just lists of fears, aren't they? Are we children? Children live in fear. Are we children? No, we're godless in the United States. Because that's where fear comes from. If you've got your Bibles, I want to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 14. I'll begin in just a moment in verse 6. Of the top 5 characters of the Old Testament, this guy's one of my favorites. He's probably not going to be one of the ones that you would anticipate. The armies of Israel are overwhelmed by the Philistines, an ongoing situation. Saul and 600 men are basically in retreat. Saul sitting under a pomegranate tree. And Jonathan steals away from them. beginning in verse 6. And Jonathan said to the young man who was his carrier of his armor, "Come and let us cross over to the garrison of the uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or few." And his armor bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart. Turn yourself, and here I am with you according to your desire." I love that armor bearer. I love his courage. But it's not courage, it's faith. We know the kind of person Jonathan was. And this guy trusted him with his life. But more than that, he trusted God. And you know the rest of the story, how they crawl up and say, "We'd like to come up there." And Jonathan says to his armor bearer, "If they invite us up, we know God's delivered them into our hands. If they come down here," it doesn't say it, but we're in trouble because it's just two of us. But look at what this guy said. And I love the way he said it. "Do all that is in your heart. Turn yourself, and here I am with you according to your desire." You know what he's saying? Turn around and look, and that's where I am. I've got your armor. I am with you. And whatever it is that you want to do, we will do together. Guys, that's not a hero. That's a man of faith. These are two men of faith. And the rest of the story, the guys say, "Come on up. We got something to show you. Come on up. We got something to tell you. Yeah, we're going to tell you something." And they get up there, and Jonathan starts killing them, and the armor bearer does too. He's not a warrior. He's a warrior in training. And they kill about 20 of them. And the rest of the Philistines run because of two men who were not heroes. They were men of faith. Now, the great thing about that is it doesn't take much faith. John chapter 11, verse 16, Thomas, when they were going to head back to Jerusalem, they're going to head back to ultimately Jesus' death. Thomas, therefore, who's called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us go also, that we may die with him." Some people, when they read that, hear almost a depressed resignation. What I hear is very much at peace, trust. You go, we're going to die with you. Same as the armor bearer. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel chapter 3. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. He will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." These are not heroes. They're men of faith. Because basically what they're saying is, God can deliver us. And if he chooses not to, what happens? He delivers us. One way or another, we're delivered. You can't stop us. And we have nothing to fear. Brothers and sisters, in a culture obsessed with fear, we need men and women of faith to step up. The world doesn't need heroes. It needs men and women of faith. Matthew 17, verse 19, the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast out the demon?" And he said to them, "Because of the littleness of your faith. Truly I say to you, if you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, 'Move from here,' and it shall move, and nothing will be impossible for you." If we have the faith the size of a grain of mustard seed, nothing is impossible. And if God has stated it, if God desires it, will he let us fail? Absolutely not. I talked in a Wednesday night lesson about doing a ropes course and how the ropes course did not help me with my fears. because I knew I was tethered. I've done ropes courses where you're silly because you can't fall. What happens if you do? It just becomes a bungee jump. And that's excitement of a totally different kind. When you can do a ropes course with no fear of failure, there's no reason to have fear. If you can't fail, there is nothing to be afraid of. Brothers and sisters, we are tethered to God. And there cannot be failure. There can only be success. Therefore, there is no basis for fear. Nero, one of the most ungodly people and ungodly kings, one of the things that he would do, according to history, is he had beautiful gardens off the side of his bedroom. He would take Christians and he would put them up on spears, sometimes on mock crucifixes, and he would anoint them with oil and set them on flame. And at night, he would walk through his gardens by the light of flaming Christians and listening to them scream and all that as they died. He didn't be any more perverse than that. If you look in Fox's Book of Martyrs, you'll see about a man called Ignatius. He was in his 80s. He had been taken by Nero's army, and they had brought him, and he was selected to be one of the ones that Nero was going to light his gardens with that night. They put him on a pole, doused him with oil, and Nero, feeling the height of his perversity, went up to this guy, looked up at him and said, you know, all you need to do is deny Christ, and you can come down from that pole. And this guy who came to become known as Ignatius, which is Latin for fire, looked down at Nero and said, my Lord has stood beside me every step of my life. Why would I abandon him now? Nero was incensed. And he gave the order, and they put the torch to him, and he burned to death. But listen to the rest of the story. Nero stormed back into the bedroom of his palace and tore it up. He was so angry that anyone would stand in the face of the great Nero. And Nero was one of the first to be worshipped as a god. And he was so angry at the defiance of this man that he tore up his whole bedroom, had a fit, because he understood something. How do you stop these people? If they've got nothing to lose, they have nothing to fear. And if they have nothing to fear, they're the most dangerous people on the earth, because you can't manipulate them, you can't frighten them, you can't intimidate them, you cannot stop them. The time of probably the greatest expansion of the church in the United States of America came as a result of World War II. As a result of World War II, Americans were very insecure. Our faith in ourselves had been rocked. And we needed security. We needed to be able to hope that there wouldn't be a World War III, because we had had two wars in rapid succession that pulled the whole world one way or another into them. And we were, as a nation, we were insecure. We were frightened, just like we are now. But leaders of faith, men and women of faith, stood up, stood in the gap, stood on the principles of God, and didn't waver. And churches grew, not just here, but all over the world. And as a result of folks who had looked fear in the face coming back and establishing not just those, but our Christian camps. Have you ever wondered why our Christian camps were run like military? That's where these guys learned how to do that. That's where they learned discipline. That's where they learned all of those kinds of things. And they came back. And many of our congregations look back to the 60s and the 70s as the greatest time of growth in our congregations. And many now are fearful of decline. And brothers and sisters, aren't we asking one another what's going to happen when this pandemic is gone one way or another? What's going to happen to our congregations? What's going to happen in Fort Gibson? What's going to happen in the Fort Gibson Church of Christ? Will people have wandered away and not come back? Are there small congregations, and we could name some around us, who are going to end up not being as a result of what this pandemic has done? Fear brings insecurity. People want relief from fear and despair. And brothers and sisters, if we will it, and I'm telling you God does, if we will it, this can be our finest hour. Because we have no one or nothing to fear. We've got a message of liberation to everyone who's trembling in fear. We are tethered to a God who will not allow us to fail. So we are fearless. We cannot be stopped. We will rise when the challenge of our times in which we live, if we are not intimidated by fear that is presented to us as rejection and hatred. We will rise on the promises of God. And in the next quarter of Wednesday nights, that's what we're going to be looking at, the promises of God that we can stand on and know with certainty, I shall not be moved, because I stand on the promises of God. Fearing no one, fearing nothing, not even the gates of hell itself. Brothers and sisters, we stand on the precipice. When a world is just covered over with fear, we stand on the opportunity for our finest hour. Our world needs it. Our world wants it. It just hasn't been given to them in the way they understand and can relate to. This can be. If we simply revive our fearlessness of being tethered to the promises of God, promises through which we cannot fail, our great-great-grandchildren can look back on this very time and they can say, truly, this was the Fort Gibson Church of Christ's finest hour. Will it happen? Don't say if God wills. He wills it. He's made that evident. Will it happen? That depends on you and me. Will we listen continually to a culture of fear? Or will we stand on the promises of God, not in defiance, in fearlessness? This can be our finest hour. If you establish or reestablish resolve to stand on the promises of God, and if you decide that today, this can be your greatest hour. Can we help you do that? The invitation is yours. Take a stand. Can we help you do that? Come as we stand and sing, would you?